I'm going to share the rundown of what to expect on this webinar tonight, which is hosted by Appalachian Voices, the Sierra Club, and Tennessee Citizens for Wilderness Planning. I'll kick us off then with a quick overview of some of the recent events we're going to be talking about. There's a whole lot happening in the TVA landscape right now, and we're going to unpack it together. And we're going to be focused tonight on TVA's recent move to extend the operation of its coal plants. So the first half of this webinar will look at the impacts of TVA's coal plant extensions, and the second half will look at how we're responding and what we can do together. We're really lucky to be joined by some fantastic speakers tonight. And after my brief overview, my coworker Leah McCord will kick off the impact section with a look at how this move could affect energy affordability and our power bills. Then Natalie Levine with the National Parks Conservation Association will tell us how continuing to burn coal links with air pollution and regional haze and what that means for places like the Great Smoky Mountains. Jessica Waller Downs had a personal situation come up a couple hours ago and likely won't be able to join us tonight, but I will share some recent news that she has been in to speak on this issue if she's not able to join us. Then we're going to move into how we're responding, and we'll start with a short presentation by Delaney King with the Southern Environmental Law Center. And then my coworker Angie will share a bit about her experience organizing around and living by the Cumberland coal plant before taking us into our social media call to action for y'all tonight. Then I'll share some upcoming events and we'll close it out. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A with the speakers. So feel free to put questions in the chat box as we're talking tonight, and we'll pick them up during that question and answer session at the end. And we'd also love to hear from y'all in the chat about your own reasons for showing up tonight. If you'd like to give us a heads up about what brought you here, that can help us, make sure we're answering your questions. So now I'll take us into recent events. So what's going on at TVA? A lot of us want to know. TVA is a federal electric utility, the nation's largest public power provider, and it's been in the news a lot lately. Pretty soon after taking office in 2025, Trump began firing TVA board members, which left the utility without quorum for much of a year. That meant TVA couldn't make decisions during this time about things like its long-term energy plan, called the IRP. And by this February, a new suite of board members had been confirmed, and the utility had its first board meeting with new decision makers in place. So they came ready to enact a lot of changes in line with federal attempts to prop up the coal industry. They voted unanimously at this meeting to keep running all four of their remaining coal plants indefinitely, including Kingston and Cumberland, instead of retiring them as it brings new gas power plants online at the same sites. And if you've been following TVA news for a while, you'll know that TVA has been planning the retirement of these two plants, Kingston and Cumberland, for years because they're old, they're expensive, and they're unreliable. Kingston is one of the oldest active coal plants in the whole country. And adding salt in the wound, TVA has been using the plant retirements to help justify massive new gas plants and pipelines at the same sites, even as communities have long been organizing for clean energy instead. So this bait and switch means folks near Kingston and Cumberland would be breathing toxic pollution from not one, but two power plants for as long as TVA sees fit. Or that's what they want to do. But we know that this is unjust. At that same board meeting, the TVA board voted to approve another 150 megawatts of power for the contested data centers operated by Elon Musk's XAI in Memphis, which doubled TVA's total power commitment to the site. And they also voted to eliminate goals around renewable energy and diversity, equity, and inclusion from TVA's strategic priorities. So there was a whole lot of bad at this meeting, and we're going to get into more about what that means for us and what we're doing about it. But I'll pass it to Leah to get into that for us.
Thanks, Gabby. Let's see if I can share this correctly. I think I did it. All right. So I'm Leah McCord. I'm the Tennessee Projects Coordinator at Appalachian Voices. I'm based out of Knoxville. Um, I work mainly on TVA issues and help facilitate the Cleanup TVA Coalition, which I see many of our members are in participation tonight. So, hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit about affordability and rate impacts and why this is important for us to be paying attention to as we move forward. So we would love to say that TVA made the decision to close its coal plants because of social and environmental concerns, and those were definitely part of the picture. But their own internal decision making really revolved around reliability and cost of continuing to run these coal plants, like Gabby mentioned. They're old, they're unreliable, they're costly. So in 2021, they released this aging coal fleet evaluation and laid out the reasons why they thought they needed to close these coal plants. And as you can see on the slide here, operating costs for existing coal units, that's their bold, not mine, is a major concern for them. They recognize that to keep these plants running, they will likely have to make costly repairs, costly upgrades, and that fuel costs are becoming unpredictable. And it's really just not in their best financial interest to try to keep these coal plants running when they can replace them with other generation. So their argument about affordability really set the scene. Let's see. They have these key drivers for their aging coal fleet. Let's see if my clicks work. Yeah. The first one being substantial performance and cost risk. So not only are these not economically efficient to run, they are not reliable. As many of you from Tennessee probably know, both of them have had outages in recent years. They've gone down during winter storms. And so, TVA is having to spend a lot of money to fill the gaps when those plants are not running correctly. And just their operating costs in general are becoming more and more burdensome. They also have to deal with the long-term financial health of the mining industry as a whole, so that whether or not they are able to get enough coal at a reasonable price becomes more and more concerning for them. So these are some of the biggest reasons that the decision was made initially that these coal plants would be taken offline, with Cumberland and Kingston being the first ones targeted. The second point on this slide, public, political, regulatory, and marketplace pressures, is important now because TVA is changing their tune and saying, no, we need to keep them open now. And it's fine. It's going to be cost effective to do so because these things are not in play anymore. Some of them have changed. The political landscape has certainly changed. The regulatory landscape has definitely changed. A lot of regulations we were anticipating have been rolled back, but the public pressure is still there. And, you all showing up to a webinar like this is proof of that. But the marketplace pressures are still there, as we talked about on the last slide. So the justification for keeping the coal plants is thin at best. They're also, as I said, just uneconomic. So Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, has this great uneconomic dispatch tool. The link is there on the bottom. We can put it in the chat if you're interested in looking at it. And they lay out for Cumberland and Kingston when the plants are cost effective to run and when they're a real cost sink to run. And as you can see on the bottom part of those two graphs, for most of 22 to 24, every time they were running these coal plants, we were losing money. It was costing more than they were making on the sale of the energy. The uptick you see there in December of 24 on both of those plants coincides with some nuclear outages that were unexpected and ended up taking over a year to resolve. And so that's the only time we see these coal plants being economic to operate is when we have a massive nuclear outage that they weren't anticipating. meaning they had to buy power from somebody else, mostly our neighbors to the west. Um, and if you look at the square with the different colored squares in it, all of the orange is the months from 2015 to 2023 that it was uneconomic for TVA to run their coal plants. And the blue is the months that it made some economic sense. So that's a lot of orange to be looking at and being able to make an argument that these plants make financial sense to continue running. So I want to touch a little bit on how TVA makes decisions about what resources to use. If you follow the IRP process, they talk about least cost planning a lot. And there's a lot of text here. The really important bit is this bit in red. When they're looking at a resource like a coal plant or a solar field, they can only account for so much. So they can only really account for the cost of building that resource and the knowable costs, like the fixed costs to keep it running. They do try to incorporate fuel costs when they're doing these planning documents, but fuel is a very unpredictable market. And so they can only do so much to really know what the cost of each of these resources is going to look like. So to give an example of that, this is from the 2025 draft of the IRP. And you can see on the screen, it says it's as of July 2024. TVA's own data is telling them that the cost to run a coal plant is, this like $3,500 per kilowatt up to about $4,500 per kilowatt. So that they're comparing that to other resources when they're trying to pick which ones they're going to continue running, which new ones they're going to build. Other important things on this screen before we move to the next one is this annual outage rate. So coal plants are anticipated to be out of service 25% of the year, according to TVA. That is a lot. The other resources that they list only have a 5 to 8% annual outage rate. So this is significantly higher than the other things that TVA can choose to make power with. And then you have this overnight capital cost. So that's the big one that they use to decide if they're going to build more of a resource, to keep a resource online. So 2 years ago, that cost was $3,176 per kilowatt. When we move to the 26 version of the IRP, so just 2 years different, that number has already gone up to $3,452. So that's a $306 per kilowatt upcharge in just 2 years. That doesn't seem that bad until you think about for this 650 megawatts that they're talking about, it could be over $200,000 per year additional costs. And as you see here, they anticipate that cost going up over the next 20 years, which is what the term of the IRP is. So their affordability argument really falls apart when you look at these are the documents that they present to the public. All of these are pulled from their own public-facing presentations and documents. And that's not where the affordability issue ends. So we know that TVA makes the power. We buy power from local power providers. And so how does it end up affecting us and our bottom line? So that's in what we call pass-through costs. It's things that TVA may consider when they're planning, but they don't really carry the costs themselves. So if you have a bill that has these different line items, mine doesn't. It just tells me what I owe. It doesn't tell me where the money is going. But some utilities will break it out like this. So you'll see your service charge is a charge to be a customer of your local utility. Those things go to like keeping the lines going, doing emergency maintenance in your local area, things like that. Then you have a grid access charge for TVA to maintain the major transmission lines. You have the actual electricity that you used, so you're paying about 9 cents a kilowatt hour for the power that you actually use in your home. And then you have this thing called a TVA fuel cost adjustment, or it might be called a fuel surcharge. This is the charge that TVA sets to offset their own fuel costs. So this charge changes frequently as the market changes. So when you have something like coal, the cost of that coal may be unpredictable. The same thing for gas and to a lesser extent nuclear. They're going to pass on whatever they have paid in fuel. They're not going to pay it themselves. They're going to hand it over to you. And so this number fluctuates as the market fluctuates. Sometimes it's a little better, sometimes it's bad. But keeping these coal plants online is definitely an indication that this number will stay a little high as the unpredictability of the market is in place. And then you have things like health costs. This is also from RMI's website, the Economic Dispatch Tool. TVA considers environmental and social effects when they're looking at these decisions as well. But even if they can understand that there is a health cost or a social cost, they are not the ones paying that cost. And so if you see here, it's an estimate of $3 billion in health costs just at the Shawnee plant alone. And then Cumberland coming in next at almost $2 billion in health costs. So these are the ways that affordability impacts the decisions that TVA makes and the impacts on how we live our day-to-day lives because of those decisions. And I think that's it for me.
I think I'm up next. Can everyone hear me? I had to switch to my phone real fast. Okay, great. All right. Thank you, Leah. I just learned a ton, so I'm really glad I'm here. Hi, everyone. I am Natalie Levine. I am the campaign director for the Clean Air Program at National Parks Conservation Association. I'm here tonight to talk about how the air pollution from these coal plants and other facilities around the country impacts our national parks and how we can work together to clean it up. In the face of decisions to keep coal plants open, the rising pollution levels, and deregulation from this administration. So just a quick minute on NPCA. We are the oldest and largest advocacy organization for our national parks. We do have a lot of staff in the Southeast who you might know. Ebony Preston Goddard is our Southeast Regional Director, and her staff, Zaina Pouncey, Joshua Jenkins, Michelle Chan. And then my boss, Ula Reeves, lives in Asheville. And then we have former staff, Stephanie Kodish or Regional Director Don Barger, who's been working on this work for a very long time, that you may also know. So NPCA has been engaged in air pollution work for Great Smoky Mountains National Park for decades. In 2000, we filed litigation with our Children's Earth Foundation and the Sierra Club against the TVA. Our goal in those lawsuits was to enforce the cleanup of their numerous coal-fired power plants that were known to emit pollution that causes public health, visibility, and acid rain damage throughout the region, and especially at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The litigation took over a decade, and it was successful. It required the reduction of pollution at 59 of TVA's coal-fired plants, including the phase out of 18 of those coal-fired power plants, and requiring TVA to invest money in air pollution reduction projects across the region. So the results of that lawsuit are visible at the Smokies today, but there's still so much work to do. So in addition to the news that Gabby shared about TVA not retiring the Cumberland and Kingston plants as mentioned, There's also an unsettling national upward trend of air pollution due to the massive deregulation of air pollution standards and exemptions given by this administration to a number of polluting facilities. In just 1 year, sulfur dioxide emissions have increased by 18%. You can see on the slightly smaller graphs that at Kingston, the emissions have slightly decreased after a massive increase, and that Cumberland's emissions are actually back on the rise after a big decrease in the last few years. So again, this problem is not going away. And so why does MPCA care? In some analysis that MPCA has done of National Park Service data, we have found that 98% of our national parks suffer from haze pollution. And so what is that specific haze pollution? It is a cocktail of air pollutants, but mostly particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, and sulfur dioxide that combine in the atmosphere to scatter light, which results in our not seeing mountains, distant mountains, or richness in color. Regional haze can also be formed from volatile organic compounds, which can mix also with nitrogen oxides to form ozone or smog, which is very dangerous to breathe. And a lot of these pollutants do come from coal plants and other facilities. So what does haze pollution do in a park or a wilderness area? It can strip miles of visibility, on average about 50 miles, but you can see here that it's over 50 miles, almost 70 miles in Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, and over 50 miles in Great Smokies as well. So the impact is bigger in some places and smaller in other places. So what is our tool to help clean up this haze and this air pollution? It's called the Regional Haze Rule. So in 1977, Congress amended the original Clean Air Act with a mandate to restore natural visibility at 156 of the oldest and largest national parks and wilderness areas in the country, places like Great Smoky Mountains, Mammoth Cave, Yellowstone, and Yosemite National Parks. Per the law, the Clean Air Act, these places, 156 places, are required to have the cleanest air of any place in the country, and they're called Class 1 areas. So this Clean Air Act mandate is regulated through the Regional Haze Rule, which was established by the EPA in the 1990s. The rule requires that all states steadily reduce haze pollution to achieve natural visibility at all Class 1 areas. Every 10 years, every state must create a plan that holds requirements to reduce haze pollution. So not every state has a Class 1 area within its jurisdiction, but every state has a facility that pollutes a Class 1 area. So this map shows both the Class 1 areas and the sources of haze pollution that MPCA has identified. So the big green blobs and dots are the Class 1 areas. Again, those are the 156 oldest and largest national parks and wilderness areas in the country. The orangey red dots, those are power plants and electric generating units, or EGUs. And the grayish black dots are non-EGUs that are other types of manufacturing. We've got cement, plastics, manufacturing, pulp and paper mills, all sorts of other non-power plant industrial facilities are the gray black dots. The size of the dot corresponds to the emissions of the source in relation to how far it is from a Class 1 area. So if you have a big dot, kind of you can see in the middle in Nebraska, that big dot is a power plant. And so you don't see that many Class 1 areas near it. So that dot has a lot of emissions, but it also has a far distance to a Class 1 area. So it's really big because the emissions are high. And then you can see some gray dots over here near me in California and Los Angeles. They're pretty much right on top of those green blobs, which is Joshua Tree National Park. And those sources are actually pretty small emissions-wise, but they're pretty much within a few miles of the Class 1 area. So their dot is much bigger because of the distance to the Class 1 area versus how much their emissions is. So that's how we get the size of the dots here. So that's helpful. So if you zoom in a bit, just on Tennessee, we can see the many sources of haze pollution in the state and region. and the 5 main Class 1 areas that are impacted by those sources. You've got Great Smoky Mountains and Joyce Kilmer's Slick Rock Wilderness in Tennessee. You've got Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. You've got Cohutta Wilderness in Georgia and the Sipsey Wilderness in Alabama. Those are the 5 main Class 1 areas that are impacted by Tennessee's sources. And specifically thinking about the Kingston and Cumberland facilities, Kingston alone likely impacts 22 regional Class 1 areas, and Cumberland likely impacts 17 regional Class 1 areas. So some of those places are Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, Cape Romaine Wilderness in South Carolina, and even Breton Wilderness in southern Louisiana. So the impact of just these 2 specific plants stretches far and wide. So in 2021, Tennessee proposed a regional haze plan that only evaluated possible pollution controls from Cumberland and the Eastman Chemical Facility that I identified on the previous slide. And in the end, the state decided not to require any controls on those 2 facilities. They also decided in that plan that they depended on the retirement of Cumberland and Kingston to prove that the state was making progress in reducing pollution that impacts visibility in those Class 1 areas. So they were depending on the retirement of those 2 plants to make progress on regional haze pollution. But they did not include those retirements in the plan, which would have made them federally enforceable. That's why TVA can go back on that decision right now. So late last year, the EPA approved Tennessee's Do Nothing Haze Plan, which will allow for nearly 23,000 tons of haze pollution to continue to be emitted from Tennessee's sources. And nearly half of that amount is emitted just from Kingston and Cumberland. So if those plants would have retired, you would have gotten that haze pollution cut in half. So for now, since the EPA did approve of Tennessee's most recent plan, there is nothing from the regional haze planning perspective to do specifically in Tennessee, as the next planning period won't start for a couple of years. But we are now dealing with deregulation of the regional haze rule at the national level. So in October, the EPA opened an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, which solicited input on how the agency could modify the regional haze rule. So many of the proposals put forth by EPA could limit states from even having to create regional haze plans in the future, or even requiring reductions in emissions. So what comes next is that the EPA will take input from the fall rulemaking open docket, and then they will propose revisions to the regional haze program. And MPCA thinks that what EPA does here could potentially be catastrophic for the power of the regional haze rule to protect national park air quality. While we don't have the exact timeline for the proposed rulemaking at the federal level, we expect engagement this summer to include a public comment period, which will have hopefully a public hearing and comment opportunities. So this will be our moment to defend the regional haze rule, and we'll need your help both locally and nationally. So collectively, we'll need to advocate for an even stronger rule, fight the deregulation, so that we can require places like Cumberland and Kingston to close in the future. So I'm not sure if Jessica joined, but I will kick it to Jessica or over to Delaney.
I can go ahead. I was going to pause, Gabby. I don't know if you wanted to put in the news coverage now in Jessica's stead or wait until the end.
Thanks. Yeah, I just put it in the chat, but unfortunately she's not able to join. But I encourage folks to read her powerful words in the article. And thanks, Delaney. Over to you now.
Thanks, Gabby, and thanks everyone for being here this evening. My name's Delaney King. I am an associate attorney with the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee. If you don't know about SELC, we are, I think, some 200 policy and legal professionals working across the Southeast on a wide variety of environmental issues. I am going to talk about a specific environmental issue, and that is fossil fueled plants in Tennessee. So Here's where I will share my slides and assume someone will tell me if I did it wrong. Are you seeing presentation view? Maybe. We're going to keep going. All right. So saw the thumbs up. Thank you so much. Okay, so a lot of our work in recent years has been focused on TVA's massive methane gas build out, which you've heard a little bit about because of how it relates to these two plants. And two of those gas plants are planned for TVA's Kingston and Cumberland sites because those coal plants would be retiring. So if you are not familiar with where we're talking about, this is the Cumberland site. It's in Middle Tennessee, Stewart County. And the blue square is the coal plant, and the purple square down at the bottom of the screen is where gas plant is currently under construction. And so at this site, as well as at Kingston, TVA evaluated the retirement of its coal plants and decided to replace the lost generation with the new gas plant. So I have Kingston over in East Tennessee, Roane County. Both you'll see sets of both sites, which TVA calls its reservations, are on waterways. For Cumberland, that's the Cumberland River. For Kingston, that's the confluence of the Emery and Clinch rivers. So this is very common for power plants to be sited along rivers, but also has dramatic implications for water resources that are nearby, in addition to all of the air issues that Natalie just covered. So Gabby touched on this up front, but TVA's decision to retire its coal plants in the first instance was perhaps a bit overdue, but the product of some years of decision making. So I'm going to take us through a timeline briefly of what's been already said, but just so folks are aware, Leah mentioned the aging coal fleet evaluation in May of 2021, where TVA staff looked at its old coal fleet and said, I think we should shut these down. And the result of the evaluation was a recommendation that TVA retire all of its currently operating coal fleet by no later than 2038. And for Kingston and Cumberland, those units be retired no later than 2031, with the earliest units retiring later this year in 2026. So pursuant to that recommendation, TVA went about in compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, a law I'll talk about in a second, issued a scoping report where it published its potential retirement of both coal plants and discussed potential alternative generation resources to replace those lost megawatts. They published a draft environmental impact statement, that's EIS, where they circulated that for notice and comment, and then followed that up with a final EIS. All of this culminated in a record of decision published in the Federal Register, deciding to retire the coal plants due to their age, material condition, and potential unreliability, or the costs that would need to be incurred to make them operate reliably. In both situations, they decided to replace that lost generation with a gas plant. Now, we at SCLC took some issues with the way that process went down. We found some flaws, and we have some pending lawsuits in that regard for both of those plants. But nonetheless, this was TVA's process by which it complied with the National Environmental Policy Act, which, if you don't know, is the nation's bedrock environmental law, and it asks federal agencies such as TVA to look before they leap, to study and disclose the environmental impacts of any major decisions that they're planning to make. So if we look at this timeline, we fast forward to 2026, we have a supplemental environmental impact statement, and that was posted to TVA's website earlier this year, and that's where they studied what they characterize as a new alternative, and that alternative is continuing to run the coal plants instead of retiring them as they had decided back in 2023 and 2024, and that was promptly followed up by the board resolution that Gabby covered at TVA's February board meeting. So how did we get here specifically from notice and comment and multiple years and decision to retire to reverse of that decision? That has to do, like I said, with the National Environmental Policy Act. TVA in January changed its way of implementing that law. Each agency comes up with its own rules and has them approved and circulated for how it's going to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, that federal disclosure law. TVA's new procedures became effective in late January, and they all but repealed what was previously a commitment by TVA to publicly disclose draft environmental documents and the impacts of certain decisions with opportunities for public comment. The new regulations leave that to TVA's discretion if and when they will publicize decision making ahead of time. And the new rules, we see a lot more of TVA having notification that a decision has happened, like the supplemental EISs. So this is a little wonky, granted, but it's incredibly important for how decisions that our agencies make get made, such as TVA and those that affect our environment and local communities. So if it's not obvious, I'll tell you anyway. There are a lot of, if you want to run a coal plant or a gas plant, there are a lot of laws that will apply to each of those processes, and there are a lot of laws that apply to the decision to do both of those processes at once. So, for example, TVA identified 35 different laws at the state and federal level, regulations and executive orders that would apply to the decision to retire the coal plants and build a new gas plant. It identified, a slew of environmental resource areas that would be affected, everything from air and water to public health and environmental justice. And it identified which permitting actions it would need to pursue to set up and start running a new gas plant. Now, Natalie's presentation also mentioned this. The degree to which TVA had plans to retire the coal plants has implications for its new decision not to do that when we look at two major pieces of energy generating infrastructure at these two sites. So 4 total plants where there have previously been 2 and would in future only be 2. We've doubled that. And I have one example to show y'all for what that might look like. So when applying to the state environmental agency, TDEC in Tennessee, for its air permit application, TVA pointed to the fact that it would be retiring its coal-fired units at Cumberland by no later than December 2028. And as such, emissions at the site would decrease when it subtracted the coal-fired emissions from the new gas plant's emissions. So there's a lot. Alphabet soup is prevalent in the environmental law world. I tried to spell out the abbreviations, but you can see the math they've done in the table of here. The first column is the pollutant. The next 2 are the gas-related infrastructure. And then that third column are both of the coal units together that are parentheses retired. And then you get negative emissions. So that was TVA's presentation in its application. And now, obviously, we have what we believe to be a step in the wrong direction, which is the continued operation of these coal plants, which obviously folks before me and folks after me will continue to explain, will have dramatic consequences on the environment for the years that TVA continues to keep operating them. And so at SCLC, we're incredibly glad to collaborate with the folks that hosted tonight's webinar to continue to speak out against these decisions. And with that, I will pass it on to Angie and look forward to any questions. Thanks. Stop share.
Thanks, Delaney. Hi, everyone. I'm Angie. I am the Middle Tennessee field organizer for Appalachian Voices. And I am trying to get my slides up here. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little context, but promise to keep it brief, so we'll have lots of time for questions. TVA's Cumberland fossil plant in Stewart County is one of the largest coal plants in the country, and it has supported local jobs for that area, That's about the only good thing I can say about it, because with that, it has also brought decades of pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, which is why many people living nearby were happy to hear that it was closing. But you can imagine our surprise and extreme disappointment when we learned that they wanted to replace it with a new TVA methane gas plant at the same site. And to supply fuel to this new gas plant, they would need a 32-mile pipeline that would run through Stewart, Houston, and Dickson counties. And the pipeline really matters in the story because the people along that route were told something very specific, that this was necessary to move us away from coal. Folks were forced to sign away easements, deal with construction impacts, and long-term risks to their land and streams, with the understanding that this was needed in order to shut down the aging coal units at Cumberland. But now both units there are expected to continue operating for the foreseeable future. And at the same time, the gas plant and pipeline, which are about 99% complete, will be operational very soon. So, in fact, this is not a transition, but it's an addition. For those of us that live nearby the coal plant, this includes me, I live about 8 miles from TVA's Cumberland fossil plant. And that means that we are staring down a double whammy of pollution. Now, when I talk to folks in Cumberland City, the feelings there are a bit complicated. On one hand, you know, people recognize that the coal plant has historically provided jobs. But on the other hand, you know, there's a growing sense that continuing to burn coal and now adding on top of that the gas is keeping the community there stuck in the past. I've heard this directly from residents and even the local leadership there, because it's hard to attract new families or businesses when you've got polluting smokestacks that are dominating the skyline. And honestly, that tracks with what we're seeing across rural communities where people want opportunity, but there's even more value in having clean air, healthy water, and a place that they feel good about living in and investing in. From a personal standpoint, living this close, I am very concerned about what happens as the new gas units come online, bringing additional air pollution and cumulative impacts, especially in a community that's already been carrying that burden for decades. Now I want to talk for a minute about Cheatham County, where TVA had planned an additional gas plant on rural farmland that's currently agriculturally zoned. This was a true greenfield project. And for over 2 years, local residents and partners organized against this, showing up, speaking out, and doing all the right things. But what really changed the trajectory was when a local celebrity visited one of the impacted landowners and helped them tell their story. He posted a short video to his audience, over 1 million followers, and it went viral. So suddenly this wasn't just a local issue anymore, it had a national platform, and TVA responded. That project was canceled, with social media playing a huge role in that outcome. Now TVA plans to auction off that land to the highest bidder. So for folks in Cheatham County, that creates a different kind of uncertainty, because without guardrails, that land is under the threat of being used for some other form of industrial development, So the fight there isn't over, it's just shifting. And that brings us to what we can do next. Because Cheatham County showed us something really important that only takes one story shared by the right person to shift the narrative. So we want to start coordinating a stronger social media push, sharing concerns and stories from across the valley, and intentionally tagging TVA to increase visibility and accountability. The goal isn't just to post more, it's to amplify real experiences and concerns in a way that can travel. Because we've already seen that when enough people speak up and when those messages spread, it can influence outcomes. One post might reach a few people, but the right post could reach millions. So if you're willing, we'd love for you to be part of this. There's a link to a social media toolkit that will be posted in the chat where you can find some ideas. But I would like to encourage you to share what you're seeing, share what you're experiencing, and don't be afraid to tag TVA to keep this conversation in the public eye. Because at the end of the day, these decisions shape our future and our communities, and the people who are impacted should have a real say in what happens next. So let's keep our voices front and center. Thank you. And I will stop sharing and turn it back over to Gat.
Thank you, Angie, and thank you to all of our speakers. I'm going to share my screen one last time before we get into the Q&A, but please do check out the social media toolkit and tag TVA or tag your local power company too, and show them, that we're outraged about this, that we want answers, we want transparency, we want to know how much, keeping the coal plants on would actually cost us, and we deserve those answers. I'm gonna just name a couple of upcoming events and other actions that we can take. If you want to get involved. The first is TVA's Regional Energy Resource Council, or RERC meeting, which is on Thursday, April 23rd in Chattanooga, Tennessee. There will be online access and a public listening session too, but this is an opportunity to influence TVA's long-term energy plan, or IRP, before it's approved, since this council will be writing recommendations to the TVA board, and the timing of this one is important. It's a really good in-person or online opportunity to affect change. So stay in touch with Leah and the Cleanup TVA Coalition for more on that event. We'll be sharing more soon. TVA's next listening session and board meeting will be May 21st and 22nd in Guntersville, Alabama. So we'll have folks going to that too. There's usually a good crew that attends those. And if you want to stay in the loop about actions to take on regional haze, please get in touch with Natalie at NPCA and join the Regional Haze Allies Coalition. An EPA rulemaking process on regional haze is expected in the next few months, so support is needed to engage the media, prepare comments and testimony, and more. So definitely get in touch with Natalie if you want to get involved or learn more about that. And please don't forget the toolkit, which also has online actions you can take on protecting communities from coal ash, opposing the privatization of TVA assets, and more. Like we said at the start, there's a lot happening in the TVA space, and I know it gets to be, there's a lot. So we hope we consolidated some of it for y'all. So now we can move on to Q&A. Keep the questions coming, and we will do our best to answer them here.